I'm Sykotix, I'm with Lonesome Studios, and today I'm about to show you some MIDI drum programming in Ableton. We're going to make some Trap Soul style drums in the style of like Bryson Tiller, New Drake. You know what I'm saying? All right, let's go. Right, so drum programming in Ableton, when it comes to doing your drums, there's two ways you can do it. In the arrangement view, which is the view that we have here, this is the session view. This is the arrangement view that we have here, and we're going to be working with this view. You can do it in MIDI or audio. And today I'm going to be showing you in MIDI. We're going to be using a drum rack, which comes with Ableton. So we need to make a new MIDI track. In order to do that, we need to hit Command-Shift-T on a Mac, Control-Shift-T on a PC. And then we're going to go to the search bar up here. I like to use Command-F. It's a really useful shortcut tool for you to like search everything. Command-F, and I'm going to type in drum rack. Alternatively, we can go to instruments, and then drum rack is down here. So we can either drag and drop it onto the new MIDI track, or we can double click and it will make a new instance of the drum rack right here. So now we've got our drum rack. It's essentially like a drum machine. So you add your own samples, and then each pad is instantiated by default, and its output can be sent to multiple sources. So it's really flexible. Today I'm going to show you how to do it all within one MIDI clip, keeping it all in-house. So right, so we've got our drum rack, and the second thing we need to do is populate it with samples. This is where sound selection comes in, because sound selection is the other key part to making music. If you're hearing a Coldplay track, you wouldn't hear them start using drum and bass drums for their new song. They might if it's a fusion track, but typically they're not gonna. You sort of need like for like, you have to use the right tool for the job. So I'm gonna open up the samples that I have. Okay, so now we've populated our drum rack with some samples. These are a combination of my own samples, some of my own made samples. So I've got a kick, a rim, this is going to be kind of experimental as well. So it's not going to be just straight trap soul, but it's going to be able to give you a couple of ideas where you can add your own flair. So try to choose the best kit for the job. It's going to differ with each kit, and also it's going to differ. Don't take the sounds as they are, because this is pre-effects. We're looking for warm, full-bodied, and snappy drums. So if you don't have like the sickest trap soul kit, just go with sounds that are warm, full-bodied, but snappy. So all right, so we've got our drum rack. So populate with the samples. Now we need to start making the track. So typically, I mean, trap soul, I'm not gonna say typically, because I mean, yeah, well, kind of. It's between 100 and 105 BPM. I'm gonna go for 102, just cause. And the reason why we started these sort of like slow BPMs is because it's really gonna expose the different rhythms available to us. So, you know, stuff like, we're going to be using stuff like polyrhythms and syncopation. So that goes a little bit into theory. But that just basically means making use of different rhythms, or, you know, rhythms within our four. All right, so we've imported our samples, and now we're going to make an 8-bar loop. Now, in order to do that, we can highlight a region here on the Ableton arrangement view, right click, and then hit insert MIDI clips. Or you can highlight that same region. The command is Command, Shift, and M. New MIDI region, okay? Or you can highlight based on your grid size. So if you right click and you change the grid size, based on your grid size, if you double click, you'll be able to make a MIDI region depending on how big the grid size is you've selected. See that? The reason why it starts at 9 is because it's the beginning of the 9th bar, but it's the end of the 8th bar. So that's the whole reason why it's labeled that way. And then right now you're going to see a kind of piano roll, and this is where our samples have been allocated. We're going to click this button up here, the headphone editor preview, or the MIDI editor preview. And what it's going to do is going to allow us to hear the notes as we play them in. So let's double check that our tempo is, you know, nice and up to speed for us. So I'm going to click the metronome button. Nice. Initially, what I would do first is I would level check the samples. So I would just see if these are coming in at a decent level. I think they're all pretty good. Apart from this one. So this one is a little bit loud. So what I want to do is I want to go into the gain parameter, because each pad has its own gain parameter, has its own set of controls. So with that one, I've turned it down by -3 dB. Most of your mixing decisions don't come until the very end anyway. Right now, we're just going to get into writing. Okay, so we've created our MIDI region, we've got our samples loaded into our drum rack, and now let's start to make the actual pattern. Now, when it comes to trap soul or alternative R&B, you want to have a relatively simple kick and snare pattern. That's going to be the backbone of your rhythm. Typically we're going to have the snare on the 3 beat. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we can add some variations. Right. So this essentially is our first 4 bars of kick. And what you want to do, when I said make an 8-bar loop, is so that we can get some variation in the last 4 bars. This is our final kick and snare pattern. Nice. So you can hear as the kick, it's giving us a lot of that weight in the bottom end. Okay, cool. Now we've got we've got beats 1 and 3 emphasized. 1 is the kick, 3 is the rim. And then all the beats in between, so the 16th notes, the 8th notes, the 32nd notes, that's going to be where the hat's going to go. That's going to be where the percussion is going to go. That's where the shuffle is going to go. And that's where your singer is hopefully going to do their melodic lines. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off doing the hats. And what you want to do between the hats is I've got a variation of like 4 different closed hats and then 2 different open hats. But note how they're all a different texture. So I've got 2 kind of generic hats, 1 sort of bit crushed hat, 1 kind of lo-fi hat, and then the 2 open hats. I have 1 clean and then 1 with a different tonal quality. And the key with trap soul is that you want to be shifting between tonal qualities while keeping the rhythm concise as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw in a hat pattern. Got to have that metronome on. Right, so now we've got our hats in. And when I play it, you're going to realize some of the hats are clashing. They're a little bit too loud. Right, so as you can see, I've got a little hat roll here. I've got a combination of hats playing at 8th notes and 16th notes. So I've got that lo-fi hi-hat that is going to be hitting kind of on the off beats, but we're making sure that it happens at the sort of beginning of every beat or at the beginning of the bar. Because that lo-fi hi-hat, those low hi-hats are going to be our anchor, and the fast hi-hats that are sort of at a higher pitch, they're going to be our driving force. They're going to be the main rhythm that keeps the singer on lock and basically which everything sort of happens around. So I've got my quick hi-hat playing a lot. I've got this shaker-esque sort of hi-hat playing on 8th notes, sort of complementing. And then I've got this other hi-hat playing off of the notes that the other ones aren't playing. So this is what I was talking about, alternating your hi-hats. If you've got 2 hi-hats that are playing at the same time, just take one of them out. Now we've got our hat pattern in, and you can see some rolls. You can do these hi-hat rolls, the same thing for snare rolls as well. We go from 16th note, we're going to change from 16th note to 2 30-second notes, like that. But with that, you can then ramp up the velocity. Use B on the keyboard, and then hold Alt, click and drag, and you'll make a velocity curve that ramps all the way up. So You can start to hear we're getting a little bit more humanistic in terms of the playing. You can control all the velocities of all the hi-hat notes relatively. So I'm going to turn down this bit crush. So now we're doing a little bit of mixing. Let's bring back the kick and the snare, or the rim. So we've got 8th note hi-hats, we've got 16th coupled, we've got rolls, different textures, and that's gonna make this work. That's really gonna sell it. Well, this is, you know, half of it. We need that open hat, and we need some percussion, because this is what is going to give that experimental flavor. Okay, so now we've populated our drum rack with some more offbeat goodness. Nice. So now we've got this groove, we've got this backbeat groove, right? So we've got this, and we've got emphasis on the 1 and the 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then throughout the actual measure, we can choose which beats to emphasize. Okay, cool. Once we're happy with the pattern, we can move on to mixing. This is what truly makes the sound the part. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the Ableton drum rack, and we're going to hit this little arrow. This little arrow is going to blow up the sample. Let's take off the metronome. So off rip, I already know that this hi-hat here is starting pretty late. So I'm going to bring the sample editor here. So I'm just going to go through and then start editing the samples by just editing the sample times, transposing some of the hi-hats, and then using the filter envelopes and using the amplitude envelopes. And I'm going to show you where all of these are. So the transposition is down here next to the pitch envelope. So I'm using the transposition at first to get at first the tone that I want. And then I'm using the filter to just cut out any unnecessary frequencies that I don't want, or things that I know I'm going to be clashing. I'm going to transpose the rim down as well. As you can see, I've got that knock perk, so we got that tail. What's very important in Trap Soul is a combination between dry and wet sound. What that means is where you have transient sounds, and then you have a really long tail. And the really long tail is normally with reverb or some type of a space designer. So we're going for a downsampled, muffled kind of sound with, like I said, transients and tails. We can control the filter amount as the song progresses, and I'm going to show you how to do that with macro controls. So I've mixed it where the kick and the snare are pretty much the loudest things. This is off mix beat. What's happening now is that all the percussion is kind of distracting. So this is where we start getting into using the audio effects, and we start utilizing the drum pad for what I was telling you earlier. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go and start EQing the kick and the rim typically. So when I drag the EQ, I'm going to go to my audio effects and then go all the way down to EQ8. And then what I can do is I can drag that onto the pad, and then it will make the EQ right alongside that pattern. If you see, it's on the kick, but it's not on the clap. It's contained within that channel. If I put an EQ outside of the whole rack, then it starts affecting everything, but we're going to get into that shortly. So I want a muffled sound with the kick. I'm going to high cut. With the snare, I'm going to take out the low end because we don't need that in the snare. I'm going to boost a little bit of the mid because we want that boxiness. We want that hollow sound. So I'm going to boost between, 1,000, 2,000 hertz. And for the high end, I'm going to do a little bit of a dip. So now we've got the timbre of our kick and our rim. On the hats, I'm going to put a effect called overdrive. What it's going to do is it's going to add a little bit more bite to the hat. Okay, so now we've got our drum rack, we've got our pattern, we've got our sounds. We've kind of started doing a little bit of the mixing. Now it's time for the finishing touches, the effects processing. So what we're going to do is we're going to go on this little button here next to the device, and it's called show or hide the chain list. So we're going to click that, and it's going to bring up all these options. Don't be alarmed. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. It's fine. It seems like a lot at first, but trust me. Here you can see all your samples triggering in real time. But not only that, we can start to set the pan of each of these, which is going to be good, right? So I'm going to color the hats a different color. That's not necessary, but I just made the hats a different color. We see the percussion and then from the main drums. And here you have further control for parallel processing. Now I'm going to get you to click on these two down here where you can see sends and returns. So you're going to hit S and R or either of those. Just make sure that R is available. It's going to show your return track. And this is where it starts getting cool. So I'm going to right click on the bottom here. After I've clicked R to bring up this bottom here where it says drop audio effects, I'm going to right click and then hit create return chain. So I've created a return chain and I'm going to call this reverb. So now we have one that's called a reverb. So what we're going to do? Well, we're going to drive a reverb on there. Full, dry, wet. This is going to be a return that we're just going to feed a select number of samples through. So when I was talking about a combination between tails and transients, the tails typically you want on the snare. So I'm going to find my snare, and because I've hit the sends and returns, I can now up this parameter, and now I start having reverb all contained within the drum rack. So I haven't sent it out to a separate return channel that I need to go and find. It's all contained within the drum rack. So I can turn off this reverb within the drum rack if I wanted to. So I can now send as much as I want without losing the original signal to the reverb. And this is going to make our rim just a little bit more atmospheric. Okay, so that's for the reverb. Well, if I wanted to send all of the drums to a return chain as well. Okay, so this is going to be cool. What we're going to do is we're going to call this FX verb. Now I'm going to get you to hit this input output button. Now it's starting to get a little bit, well, okay, but don't worry, don't panic. So now we've got our chains, we've got our sends, and then we've got our volume, our pan, our mute, our solo, and then the audio 2. What we need to focus is this audio 2 section. So each sample that you drag in can be sent somewhere else. So what we want to do is we want to highlight all of the chains. You can do that with either Command A or Shift and then clicking on the top and the bottom. Clicking on the rack output and not selecting drum rack reverb, selecting drum rack FX verb. So not send A, send B. So we're going to output everything to send B, okay? Now on send B, we don't have anything. We don't have anything on send B. But what we're gonna do, which is quite common, is we're gonna put a filter and we're gonna put a reverb. Now you can put your favorite plugin on here. You can put like RC20 or, you know, a Soothe, whatever you want. What I'm also gonna do, once I've dragged in my filter, so I've dragged in the auto filter, and I've dragged it on the B chain. I've dragged my reverb, I've dragged that on the B chain as well. Now, when I play, now all of the drums are being sent to the filter and the reverb. So now what we're gonna do now is we're going to select the parameters that we want to control at the same time, and we're gonna make a macro. So I'm going to right click the frequency because this is the filter movement. I'm going to map it to macro 1. So I hit that and I map it to macro 1. I'm also going to take the dry wet of the reverb and then map that to macro 1. You see it starts saying frequency to whatever you've already mapped it to. So now we're going to call this macro 1. I'm going to rename this and we're going to call this FX. Okay. So once we've assigned our macros to the first knob, I'm going to hit map, and then on here, it's going to look like this. You're going to have your min and max values for the FX. For the reverb, we're going to reverse the reverb. So as we bring the parameter up, the reverb is going to get drier and the filter is going to open. So instead of the min being 0, we're going to change that to 100 and the max from 100, we're going to change that to 0. We're going to hit map again, so we come out of that. So what's going to happen is I'm going to bring the knob, the effects knob all the way down. It's going to be really heavily reverbed. And then as soon as I start bringing it up, the reverb will start to decrease and the filter will start to open up. So this is going to be good for those effects when you have those B sections, those chorus sections, and you need to have a filter to reduce the frequency content of the drums. Maybe the singer is doing a chorus or a hook line and you need to emphasize that part. This is where using macros comes in handy. And then just to finish it off, we can use a drum bus plugin, which is what it says on the tin. Instead of having everything bust to a separate return track for your dedicated drums, you have a plugin for that. And it's just gonna beef everything up. We're gonna up the drive a little bit. We're gonna reduce the transient just a smidge, up the crunch, and then reduce the dampening, which is going to dampen the frequency a little bit. And now we have knocking trap soul drums. Okay, so now we have knocking trap soul drums. So in summary, we had to make the drums with the drum rack. We had to make the pattern, the 16th notes, the 8th notes, quarter notes, get all of them in. Then we messed around with the rhythms, polyrhythms, different hi-hats. And then we locked in with the mixing, and that really sealed the deal with the ear candy. So yeah, those are Trap Soul Drums. It's been Sykotix with Lonesome Dog Studios.